My name is Dr. Laura Davis, and this is a short video lecture on Margaret Atwood's book called The Testaments. And I'm going to be talking today about chapters 31 to 40. I will be focusing on the three different narratives from the narrators. So I'll be talking about the progression of narration with Daisy, starting with Daisy because she is in the narrative for chapters 31 and 32, and then moving on to Agnes and Aunt Lydia. Okay, so starting with Daisy, this is the section of the novel where Daisy begins her training with Garth, and we have also Ada and Elia in the narrative at this point. Now I think that we do find out in this section, chapters 31 and 32, that Daisy is being trained to go into Gilead. So we get a lot of kind of background information about the fact that Ada and Lydia from Mayday have a source who they don't actually know who it is in Gilead, who is kind of helping them and directing them, and that this source has requested that baby Nicole be sent into Gilead with the promise that she will be sent back out with a cache of documents that will lead to Gilead's downfall once they are brought to the Canadian authorities. So Ada and Elia are going on faith that this will be the case. Of course, there is the possibility, as Daisy herself brings up, that she is just being brought in, that this is a trick and she's going to be brought in and then it's like, yay, Nicole's been returned to us and there will be no cache of documents. I think this is kind of interesting that Ada has said and Elia have said that this is an act of faith, and they don't actually use that word faith, they use the word gamble. They say it's a gamble. But to my mind, I'm thinking this is really interesting because it is an absolute leap of faith that they are taking. And of course, there's a lot of religious allusions and religious language, particularly in these sections about Gilead. Not so much in the sections about Daisy directly, but this certainly can be understood as a type of faith that they are taking with this plan that they're going along with. I also wanted to point out the contrast that Atwood is setting up between Daisy and Agnes here. Daisy, on the one hand, is being trained to be a fighter, in the physical sense of that word. I mean, physically and mentally, Garth is training her to fight. And those, I think that those scenes are quite appealing from a kind of, you get a sense of power as Daisy trains, as this young girl trains to be strong, both mentally and physically. But that is in direct contrast to what we find is going on with Agnes, where she is being brought up to be prim and proper, not to read, not to have any sort of power, physical or otherwise. Okay, so that's kind of what we get with Daisy. I also wanted to mention that Daisy has chosen another name, and that name is Jade. So there's lots of naming. I've talked about names before. In this case, Daisy is a flower, and there is, I think, an extended metaphor going on through the text with regard to flowers. So remember that earlier in the text, there's this section called Precious Flowers, or I think it's called Precious Flowers, and it's about the girls in Gilead being told the precious flowers because they are fertile and they have this kind of preciousness that they supposedly have to protect for the commanders of Gilead. So Atwood's extending that metaphor of the flower when she talks about Daisy and draws attention to her name. And Daisy herself does draw attention to her name as a flower when she says, I need something harder than a flower. I'm going to pick the name Jade, right? So again, it's this kind of movement towards being tough, kind of taking a tougher name and maybe a less precious, soft name like Daisy, which again refers back to the flowers. And we might also think about the notion of jade. Jade, the substance jade, the gem, I guess you would call it, the mineral. It is associated with purification, which is kind of interesting if you think that she's being sent into Gilead to kind of purify, to change things in this way. Daisy is in a sense being sent into Gilead as a kind of sacrificial lamb. She is the one that they're going to put forth, going to Gilead, hoping that she will be able to bring it to its downfall and to save the people of Gilead from that oppression that they have been suffering since its beginnings. So at the end of the section with Daisy, she gets a tattoo on her. This has been a request from the source, right? And we get a sense of what that tattoo is. It says L-O-V-E down and E-V-O-L across. Really interesting that she's required to get this tattoo. There is, I think, a trope going through the text with regard to writing, inscription, embroidery, crocheting. And of course, you know, I keep talking about this, but the fact that the ants are the only ones that are allowed to read and write. So yeah, keep this kind of in mind in terms of that. And it's an interesting moment because it's an inscription on the body, which then is a signal to the Pearl girls that they need to pick her up, which they're going to do anyway, because if she poses as a homeless person on the street, that's a great target for the Pearl girls who want to missionize her. Okay, I'm going to move into Agnes's story now. So around chapter 34, we go back into Agnes's story, and at this point, Agnes is getting prepared for her marriage to Commander Judd. Now, part 13, which these chapters occur in, is called secateurs, which are pruning shears. Okay, so really interesting, once again, to pay attention to those titles. Pruning shears, on the one hand, refer to a kind of violence, and in fact, they are the weapon, the tool. You can call it a tool or call it a weapon. This is some of the ambiguity of this term, which I want to draw attention to. It can be seen as a weapon. There's a violence that invoked there. It can also be seen as a tool that these women who are having suicide attempts because they do not want to marry these commanders are using. And it is a tool when you think of the gardening, right? It's a tool that shapes and gardens, just like the crocheting is a kind of shaping, the writing is a kind of shaping and creating, and so on. So there is, again, that kind of, I think we could add gardening to the tropes of writing, crocheting, creating, shaping, gardening, all that kind of stuff is going on. So we have this referred to, and this is the tool or weapon that Becky uses when she tries to take her own life, and she ends up with the ants, training to be an ant instead of marrying. And then we have very interestingly, at Aunt Lydia's instigation, we have Agnes doing the same thing, following in Becky's footsteps. Okay, Agnes's marriage preparation. So there's quite a bit with regard to this, and I think that there's a few things going on here. On the one hand, it's a bit of a Cinderella story. So I've been talking about Atwood's allusion to fairy tales throughout, and I do see some reminiscence of Cinderella here, particularly with Paula, the kind of evil stepmother. And I mean, there are lots of other tales in which stepmothers are seen as evil unfairly in a lot of ways, right? But that's how they are often seen in fairy tales, and Margaret Atwood is drawing upon that history there. So a kind of Cinderella story in reverse. I'll talk about the reversal in a minute. And I think there's other sort of reminiscences of other kinds of prior books as well. So I'm thinking of Victorian novels like Jane Eyre, Jane Austen novels, which often deal with a woman's preparation for marriage, particularly to gain material wealth. So all of this is being drawn upon. It felt very Victorian to me reading about this marriage preparation. The interesting thing, and I think I'm smiling because it's humorous at the same time, is that Atwood completely reverses the trope with regard to marriage here. So although she doesn't seem to play or reverse, at least up until now in the book, the trope of the evil stepmother, she's kind of playing into that stereotype in a sense so far. she does very much work against, she reverses the notion of the traditional kind of values around marriage that we see in Victorian novels and in fairy tales like Cinderella. So in other words, in Cinderella, in something like Jane Eyre, the protagonist wants to marry that prince. The whole impetus of the story is that they want to marry this kind of high up person, ranking person. In this novel, it's the exact opposite. They are set up to marry a very high ranking person, and they completely push back against that and actually would rather die than do that, except for Chamonix, right? So Chamonix gets Judd. But the others, Becky, and particularly because this is a focus on Agnes, Agnes does not want to marry the prince. She will do anything not to marry the prince. Okay, so a very kind of opposite, reversed kind of sense of the typical fairy tale there, and I love how Atwood does that. I think it's so much fun how she plays right into that story and then pushes right back against it and reverses what we're used to seeing in that story. And we're with Agnes all the way, right? We sympathize with her, in other words. Okay, I'm going to move into Lydia's story now, because we do get into Lydia's story too. So at this point in the chapters, I think this is I'm not sure what chapter, maybe 36, 37, somewhere between 31 and 40, we get Lydia's narrative. And at this point in the narrative, we are quite sympathetic to her character. So if we didn't like her at the beginning, you know, she's seen as tough. She's within the system of Gilead. She goes along with that system. But now we've seen what she's been through, what she had to suffer when Gilead first started. And, you know, I think at this point the reader has really come along with Lydia and is sympathetic to Lydia. We do know that she is smart. She's powerful, but she works her power very subtly in ways that are available to her. So she's a really interesting character in that regard. But in this section, we really do, I think, begin to like her because she helps Becca and Agnes. And I think there's a sense that she has a larger plan, that there's a larger plan at play here, and we're not completely privy to that yet. But we know that this story, that Agnes and Lydia's story, does have to come together at some point with Daisy's story. So it's gonna, you know, some kind of plan that Lydia has with Becca and Agnes is gonna somehow work with Daisy's story. We don't know all the details at this point though. So she helps Becca, she helps Agnes, she brings them into Ardua Hall. They're training to be aunts. She saves them from their marriage to the ugly princes that they were going to marry. Another thing I want to point out with Aunt Lydia is to pay attention to, how can you miss it really, the notion of the statue and the offerings that are being given to the statue. I mean, we get this kind of narrative about the aunts kind of backstabbing each other or not necessarily trusting each other in that sense. And we have Lydia putting the camera at her statue to see who's leaving these pieces, these oranges and eggs for her, both kind of symbolic in what they might represent. And there's the whole talk about that being idolatry, but also the notion that she is a kind of goddess to pray to. So earlier we have Daisy saying that she prays to Lydia on a whim, right? Instead of praying to God. Sacrilege in a way, but she prays to the female goddess. And her prayers are answered when Lydia actually does come to her, right? In a way, back to the Cinderella thing, it's like the fairy godmother kind of theme. Lydia's the fairy godmother in that sense, right? That Cinderella asks for the fairy godmother to help her when she can't go to the ball, and the fairy godmother appears. Here, you know, Agnes asks, prays to Lydia on a whim to help her not marry Judd, and she appears. So there we go. We like Lydia at this point. I also think that that part where Agnes meets Lydia, and she's only seen her once before, which is at Commander Kyle's funeral, her father's funeral. She sees her again when she appears at her house, right? And she's surprised at how small she is. And I think that's a really interesting little tidbit, because I think that's often the case. You know, this sort of larger than life figure who's one of the founders of Gilead, and then you see the person in real life, wow, she's really small. But also, I suggested that there, you know, the very first few lines of the book, it's like Atwood herself becoming consecrated as this famous literary person before her death, just like Lydia is represented in the statue. And Atwood herself is a very small person. And so I'm sure that people meeting her in person would have the same sort of reaction of, oh, this larger than life author is actually a very small person. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think there's some very subtle moments like that where Atwood is Lydia. Okay, now I don't want to go too far with that, but I think there are some subtle moments there where you could make that claim. And I just mean that Atwood's having fun with identifying herself with a character in that way. Chapter 39, we're just getting to almost to chapter 40 here. The beginning of chapter 39, when Agnes sees the book, right? She's left alone. She sees the book. She says, well, I've already, you know, kind of sinned in a lot of ways. I'm just going to go up to the book and take a look at it. And she sees all the white pages and the black marks on them. And she's never been taught to read, of course, because women aren't allowed to in Gilead. And even though she says flames didn't shoot out of it, because she's always been told, oh, that's bad, you know, you're not supposed to read. There's a sense that it's magical in some way. And I really like how Atwood does that. There's a sense that now she's in Ardua Hall, now she's going to be an aunt, she's going to learn to read, and there's something very magical and very powerful about that fact. Even though when Becca comes in, she says, well, it's just a rule book. I can tell you what it says, right? And it's something, the book itself is fairly banal. It's not secretive. But just the fact that she is looking at the book and that Becca can read it and that Agnes will learn to read is very powerful and very magical. So I think that, yeah, Atwood's really playing that up as well. So that pretty well takes us up to chapter 40, and that's it for now. I will have more notes and videos for you on the rest of the chapters of the book as we work through them. Thank you.